Hi there, my name is Kevin Smith, and I am the head coach, president, and chief executive running officer at a company here in Toronto called Marathon Dynamics that for 20 years has been helping runners improve by bringing out the best in them in mind, body, and spirit. In today's installment of the 7 Habits of Highly Effective Dynamo Runners, we wanted to talk with you about a term that we've coined called running health insurance. What it is very simple. It's the other aspects that I really want to focus on, but let's cover that one first. In addition to any running training you do, what we mean by running health insurance is getting out 5 or 6 times a week, very consistently, never only 4 times a week, 5 or 6 times a week, to do 30 minutes of brisk, purposeful power walking, or, if you so choose, instead, 20 minutes of very relaxed, very easy, very slow, but very quick stepping, kind of like scooting across lily pads on a lake. Jogging. Jiggity jogging is a term that I often use for it, and that's a pretty good and apt description of it. Okay? Or any mix of those two, however you like. You can do 4 walks and 1 jiggity jog, or mostly jiggity jogs and a couple of walks, or all of one and none of the other. That's fine. Okay? That's what that is. And really what it is insurance on your ability, especially over a long term, to continue to train as a runner and therefore improve as a runner, okay? Now, for me to tell you that's a good thing to do, you might say, yeah, that kind of makes some sense. But are you willing to change your life to make that so resolute that you never miss more than 2 days a week? Like never, you always commit to that. That's a big commitment. Okay? And so that's what we want to focus on in this little segment, the why. It is important because we want to talk about the history, both my own, the general running history, and the running present. Let's work actually backwards. It makes a little more sense that way. Currently, and for quite a while, runners, this is not news, are getting hurt. Okay? A lot more than we'd like, I think, is a fair statement. And it turns out that a lot of those injuries are concentrated below the knee. There's a lot of incidents of injury in the shins, both the shins themselves and the anterior muscles where we get shin splints, the calves, both of them, the bigger gastroc or the smaller soleus underneath, posterior tibial tendons, those kinds of things on the other sides. The Achilles is a big issue. The heel itself, the calcaneus, the plantar fascia underneath the foot is another sore spot for runners, or even up top, the metatarsals, the tiny little bones on the top of the foot, the bones themselves or the little tissue, the actual muscles and connective tissue in between them. All of that seems to dominate a lot of running injuries, okay? Because that's happening, we need to do something about it. And the reason it's happening is because, it shouldn't be a watershed moment, a real earth-shaking discovery. Runners, last we checked, are getting older. All of us, individually. Can't do anything about it. Our parts are getting older, and therefore they need to either be improved or replaced, and replacing is awfully tough. So let's improve and sort of rejig and give them a little more life. We're getting less mobile in our lifestyles. That's been happening for 100 years, where we sit more in cars, at our desks, that kind of thing, in our leisure. We're tied to technology, not moving. It's a more static existence, and that doesn't do good for runners, okay? Basically what happens is we know how to train if we're working with a good operation and a good company like ourselves. We know what's good for us running-wise, and we also know that in the other 23 hours a day, when we're not training, if we're doing less movement, if we're not moving around a lot, if we're basically motionless, it's in the chasm. It's in the movement from 0 to 60, if you will. It's from doing nothing to doing the right kinds of things that the injuries, that's where the injuries happen. Okay? So we're looking at filling that in with something that is very modest and easy, like agreeable to the body, not very tough or intense, but frequent. Okay? Kind of like the analogy would be erosion, water lapping at rocks. a few thousand laps doesn't do anything, but millions of laps over time relentlessly does change the shape of the rock. So that's the kind of consistency we need when we do this kind of thing, okay? And I do also put one other aspect that is causing us to get hurt more, is we're getting, some of us, even more fit. And you're like, hey, wait a minute, isn't that supposed to, help you, be a good thing? What I mean by that is a lot of us have adopted, especially those in triathloning, but even if you don't, even if you do adjunct cross-training activities to support your running only, aerobic cross-training activities, that means that your engine, cardiovascular, pulmonary, all the stuff that really gives us our energy and, to do what we do, that gets better, that gets improved, right? Get more horsepower. But running-specific muscles and bones and the things we use for running, if those don't get raised at the same level and to the same degree as the engine, if the chassis doesn't get shored up to support the bigger engine, it can rip off its moorings. It's basically, you now have an even higher incidence of injury. I see that a lot with Ironman type triathletes that train hours and hours and hours of extra aerobic cross training, doing things like swimming, which doesn't improve your shins and calves because it's weightless, and even biking, which again, your weight is supported on the bike, you're not weight bearing. So that's where those kind of come in. And again, even if you do those naturally and you're not a triathlete, you can create a disparity between your chassis and your engine. Okay, so those are pretty impactful. Older, less mobile, and sometimes some of us very motivated, even more fit. And as I said, it's all about that ankle lever. That's where a lot of the problems were. The reason this all happened with me in my history was in my 20s, actually even before that, in my teens I was this, I guess, fairly talented, showed some flashes of brilliance as a runner, but oft injured and frustrated and just could never put it together. So I had a troubled teen running career. And then in my 20s, another few flashes of brilliance, but even more injuries complicated it, made it tougher to do. And then by my 30s, by then I've been a coach for a while. I'd continued to learn through courses, reading, my own research, and most importantly, the interaction with tons and tons, hundreds and hundreds of runners every year. So I adapted my training. I didn't do just what was purported to be acceptable, good, strong, smart, safe running. I dumbed them down. I watered things down because I knew I was getting hurt more, right? And so I did a lot of things to try and get better and improve my own running. And as a result, I got worse. More injuries, longer injuries. And so when I hit my late 30s, I was hanging on. It was a real struggle because I was just, this was the love affair was a love-hate relationship with running. And I was looking for what's it going to be, what's next. And so what ended up happening were 3 events in my life that conspired and kind of confluenced, came together to hit me over the head with an epiphany moment. One was a client who I'd helped to get to the Boston Marathon, gave me a cute little gift, which was a book about the training of North America's best runners back at the turn of the last century, the 1900s, or early 1900s. So it was interesting to read. It was quaint in a way that you could see, how antiquated some of the notions were about training, how things have changed. But it was also interesting to see what held water 100 plus years later. There were some truisms that they had right, and so that was all interesting. But what jumped out at me more than anything was in this book by Harry Andrews called Training, was that even though the best runners in North America at that time trained kind of like a lot of us do, trained 3 or 4 times a week of actual run training, what I noticed was that they walked enormous amounts compared to what we do today. 5, 8, 10 miles a day on top of, and instead of, in many days, doing actual running. They walked like crazy. And I thought it'd be good, very quickly, just to read you a passage from said book. I'll get my glasses on because I can't see it otherwise. So you see what I mean, how impactful this was to read at the state I was as a perpetually injured runner. He writes, "There is one form of exercise above all others for everyday health and for training, whatever the branch of sport entered upon may be. It is in keeping with the rest of the beneficent provisions of Providence, that the very best exercise is walking, which we must all of us perforce indulge in to a greater or less extent from the time after our entry into this world, when first our legs are strong enough to carry us. Walking is the exercise beneficial beyond all others. Softly, easily, unconsciously, but surely, walking gets at every muscle in the body. No undue strain is cast upon the functions at any particular part, but all are affected for good. A walk before breakfast, a mile out and a mile home every morning is, in my opinion, worth all the medicine in the world. So it's quotes like that. Wow, this walking thing, interesting. Then I had one of my long-time running buddies from when I was a teenager. His name is Gary Westgate, who was an exceptional runner at the time and got a chance to grab the bull by the horns and take it and became Canada's best distance runner at many different distances. At one point, he was ranked the best road racer in North America for a few months in the early 90s. And then suffered a career, it seemed, ending Achilles injury. And he dropped out of running and focused on the rest of life. And 12 years later, as he approached 40, got near 40, he got the bug, he got the itch, as he had other itches, and tried to run again, and the Achilles blew up. But this time he got the itch, and it worked. He got to the other side. He began to train again, and he said that he attributed it all to the fact that he started to walk to work from High Park area to downtown. Quite a long walk. Okay, to do that. Just one way, and then he would get public transport or a lift back the other way. But he did this every day, and it slowly but surely shored up the sore and the weak and balanced things out, and it seems to have given him a new lease. And a year later, he just missed winning the National Cross Country Masters Championship as a 40-plus-year-old. That was another aha moment. Okay, and then the final one for me, let's see, where's that one? There was Gary. Oh yeah, and then there was this guy in the States, a running coach who broke through to sub 230 and attributed so much of that breakthrough to this philosophy he had of never sitting for more than 1 hour. And he literally, if he got to an hour, he'd get up and he'd literally run outside, or he'd get outside and he'd run or jog for like a minute or two, around the little block and back, sat down again and got on with work. And he said that constant dynamic movement philosophy was what kept him healthy and allowed him to get to layer on the training. Okay? So all of that was rolling around in my head as I was in my car at a Tim Hortons, 13 cars deep, a mile from my house in the morning, like I did every morning, and it just struck me. What am I doing? Why am I doing this? And the next day, I didn't touch the car. I started walking, and I was a mile out, mile back, the whole business, and I never stopped. Basically around my 40th birthday, plus or minus a few months. Never stopped. And the next 7 years straight of my running we're not talking, oh, I improved and I was able to race, or I did noticeably better. It was night and day. For the previous 12 years before that 40, I had broken 120 in the half marathon once, by a minute or so, only once. And then with a 40-year-old body, much older, for 7 years straight, every year, the slowest I ran in every of those years was 114, or faster in some years, with a much older body. And I didn't change the training that I did, really. I mean, some of the numbers changed because I got fitter, but I applied the same philosophy, and it was just the big change was this dynamic living, running health insurance. Okay? So that's why I thought I'd share the why with it. Why? And the how is pretty simple. Be flexible, be creative, find a way. There's always a way. Don't tell me you don't have time. You can find a way to get this in. You know, even if it is multitasking with family to spend time there, or get to work, travel time, you can work that in, get a subway stop off early. Find ways to get that walk in if it's going to be a walk, or if you have time and inclination, do the jiggity jog. Okay? That little peppery little step. But find a way to do it, and honestly, if you make it non-negotiable, and I don't mean over a couple of weeks, it's got to be months to let it set, you will see that you just don't have those problems that seem to crop up below the knee. All right, so hopefully that rings true, and thank you very much for listening.